Today, we're looking at how a team of animators from California ended up spending years in the heart of Mexico, learning that Dia de los Muertos isn't about being spooky. It's about never saying goodbye. Back in 2011, Lee Unkrich, the director, and his team headed to Mexico for their first research trip. They went to Mexico City, Oaxaca, and Guanajuato. Now, imagine being an animator used to sitting in a high-tech office, and suddenly you're standing in a candlelit cemetery at 2 a.m. They weren't just there to take photos of colors. They were there to listen. They noticed how families would sit on graves, eating, laughing, and telling stories. It flipped the script for them. They realized this wasn't a Day of the Dead in a morbid sense. It was a family reunion, where half the guests just happened to be invisible. Early on, the story was actually about a boy dealing with grief, but the more time the team spent with Mexican families, the more they realized that was the wrong angle. Mexican culture views death differently. It's a transition, not an end. So they scrapped the grief angle and pivoted to remembrance. They realized the real stakes weren't about losing someone. The real tragedy was forgetting them. That shift is what gave the movie its heart. One of the biggest takeaways from their research was the ofrenda. The team realized this wasn't just a decoration. It was a literal bridge. They spent hours in people's homes watching how grandmothers, the abuelitas, meticulously placed photos, favorite foods, and cempasúchil, those bright orange marigolds, on the altars. They saw that the ofrenda is the emotional engine of the home. If you didn't get that right, you didn't get Mexico right.
When the research team got back to California, they had a massive problem. How do you build a land of the dead that doesn't look like a graveyard? They looked back at their photos of Guanajuato. If you've ever seen pictures of that city, it's basically a literal pile of colorful houses built on top of each other in a steep valley. They decided the land of the dead should be a vertical history of Mexico. At the very bottom, you see giant stone pyramids, the Aztec and Mayan roots. On top of those, you see Spanish colonial arches and cathedrals. Then, as you go higher, you see Victorian-era buildings, and finally, modern skyscrapers with neon lights. It wasn't just a cool visual. It was a way of saying that the past is literally the foundation of the present. Every time Miguel climbs a staircase, he's climbing through centuries of Mexican history. While walking through the markets in Oaxaca, the team was floored by these brightly painted wooden carvings called alebrijes. Now, technically, these aren't ancient. They were dreamt up by an artist named Pedro Linares in the 1930s, but they've become a massive part of Mexican folk art. The crew realized these creatures were the perfect spirit guides. But they didn't just want them to be cute pets. They studied how the colors were applied, the tiny dots and vibrant neon patterns, to make sure Dante's transformation felt like a piece of art coming to life, not just a cartoon dragon. Now, we have to talk about the music. You can't do Mexico without getting the rhythm right. The team didn't just hire a composer and call it a day. They went on a music hunt. They recorded over 50 different traditional Mexican instruments. They wanted that specific scratchy sound of a vihuela and the deep stomp of zapateado dancing. They even made a rule. Every time a character plays a guitar in the movie, their fingers have to be on the exact correct frets for the notes we're hearing. If you're a guitar player watching Coco, you can actually learn the songs just by watching Miguel's hands. That's the level of respect they had for the craft. Early on, Disney actually tried to trademark the phrase Dia de los Muertos. The backlash from the Latino community was huge, but instead of just burying the project, Pixar did something smart. They hired their biggest critics. They brought in cultural consultants like Lalo Alcaraz and Marcela Davison Avilés. These weren't just fact-checkers. They were in the room for story meetings. If a character said something that sounded too American, or if a tradition felt watered down, the consultants would call it out. They wanted to make sure this wasn't just a movie about Mexico, but a movie that felt like it was made by Mexico. One of the funniest and most authentic parts of the movie is Abuelita Elena. You know the scene where she pulls off her sandal, the chanclita, to threaten a mariachi. In the original script, she actually carried a wooden spoon, but the cultural consultant stepped in and said, "No, no, in a Mexican household, the ultimate weapon of authority is the flip-flop." The animators spent hours studying the physics of the chanclita, the way a grandma can whip it off and hold it with such terrifying precision. It's a tiny detail, but it's the difference between a caricature and a real person. The team didn't just look at weapons of discipline, though. They looked at the love. They noticed that in many Mexican homes, the grandmother is the glue. She's the keeper of the recipes, the stories, and the rules. They modeled Abuelita's movements on the real grandmothers they met in villages. You know that stunning bridge made of glowing orange petals? That wasn't just a magic choice. During their research trips, the team saw how families would scatter cempasúchil petals from the cemetery all the way to their front doors. The idea is that the scent and the bright color guide the spirits home. The animators took that concept and turned it into a literal bridge. They spent months figuring out how to make millions of individual petals look like they were glowing from within, creating a road that felt both ancient and magical. As the movie hit theaters, something amazing happened. People started pointing to a real-life woman in the town of Santa Fe de la Laguna named Maria Salud Ramirez Caballero. While Pixar hasn't officially confirmed she was the only inspiration, the resemblance was uncanny. The braided hair, the etched wrinkles, the quiet dignity. The research team spent so much time in these small Michoacan villages that they captured the soul of a Mexican matriarch so perfectly that a whole town saw their own grandmother in her. It showed that their years of sketching and sitting in kitchens drinking Untold paid off. They didn't just draw a character, they captured a generation. When Coco premiered in Mexico, it didn't just do well, it became the highest-grossing film in the country's history at the time. Why? Because for the first time, a massive global studio didn't treat Mexican culture as a background or a sidekick. The research into the Xoloitzcuintli, Dante the dog, the specific way tamales are wrapped, and the importance of the family shoeshine business, it all signaled to the audience. The song Remember Me is the perfect summary of the whole 6-year journey. In the beginning of the movie, it's a flashy pop song. By the end, it's a whispered lullaby. That transition represents what the Pixar team learned during their years of research. They started out looking for a big, colorful spectacle, but they ended up finding a quiet, universal truth. As long as we tell their stories, our ancestors never truly leave us. So, the next time you watch Coco and you see the orange petals glow or hear the snap of Abuelita's apron, remember that those moments weren't made in a vacuum. They were the result of thousands of photos, hundreds of interviews, and a deep, respectful dive into the heart of Mexico. It's proof that when you take the time to truly research a culture, not just skim the surface, you don't just make a movie, you make a bridge.